Welcome to number 4 of the Under Your Bed Horrorcast. It's a podcast all about horror. Each episode I get a guest on. They talk to me about the genre in general and 3 of their favourite ones that they've selected. My guest this episode is Malcolm Campbell. He is a writer. He has written for TV. Name some of the TV shows you've written for.
I suppose the most famous ones are Shameless, the British version.
The British version,
yeah.
Right. What do you have thoughts on? Have you seen any of the UK version or the US version?
Yeah. I have, yeah. I watched a couple of them, just to see. The thing is, like at the time, it's funny because we were writing on it and we knew that they were developing it over there, and everyone was a bit sniffy about it, because there's obviously a long tradition of kind of not so good American, kind of making
IT crowds, Red Dwarf.
Yeah. I mean, where'd you go?
Faulty Towers.
And well, here's it. I knew a guy who wrote on the bill who made a lot of money. He back in the 80s, he wrote a sitcom called Three Up, Two Down or something, which was quite a big sitcom in the UK. Made him a lot of money. He off the back of that, it was bought by NBC or one of the big kind of broadcasters over there. He went over there. Was paid an absolute fortune not to write the first episode.
Wow.
They kind of went round the houses, pardoning puns, but and then he eventually had kind of a bad time, but came away from his year in LA with a lot of money. Kept him going until basically he was like, I should start writing again.
Right.
And I started writing on the bill.
That seems to be a recurrent thing with people when they go to LA and they kind of do nothing for a year and they get a shitload of money for it.
I think there's a whole bunch of British writers
twiddling their thumbs over in LA. Wow.
I mean, I don't know how many of them are actually earning money, but there's certainly the guys. I mean, I know most recently the Sherlock guys. They just literally went, here you go, take it. Here's we know you're going to do your own spin on it. I don't know if you remember Life on Mars a few years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, they did. I think they did some quite interesting experimental
stuff.
Yeah,
they did the remake with Harvey Keitel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they only made 4 or 5 of them.
No, I think they made the whole series.
And did they? Okay.
Going to Mars, I think, or something like that. They did
take
it quite literally.
No, I actually saw the last episode, and he wakes up and he's in a deep sleep, like the start of Alien or something, and he wakes up and they're on the way to Mars, and they're playing not Life on Mars. They're playing an Elton John song. I forget which one.
Rocket Man.
Was it Rocket Man?
I don't know,
obviously, something like that. Obviously, they couldn't get the rights to Life on Mars, which is really...
Which they had in the UK, but... so anyway, I digress. But Shameless. So so there was all these rumours going around. However, we knew that it was being kind of execed by the guy who created Shameless, who is a bit of a genius, a guy called Paul Abbott. And he was kind of... Because when we were working on Shameless, this is probably way off message.
No, it's a cool introduction to yourself and all that.
While we were working on Shameless, what they used to do is they kind of tried to copy the American kind of writer's room, and they would get say there were maybe 6 or 7 writers working on a series, and you'd all get maybe 3 or 4 episodes each, and every now and again you'd go to Paul Abbott. Paul Abbott lived in a nice part of Manchester, and he bought the house next door and turned the house next door into a writer's studio.
Wow.
And an artist's studio. So Paul Weller would go and record an album there, or just do some kind of jamming with musicians and stuff. And so it had its own chef. You got your own bedroom. I mean, it was an amazing place. Next door was Roy Keane.
So the writers had their own little bedroom, right?
Yeah, you got your own bedroom.
Wow.
You'd go down every day. You'd have proper formal meetings, but then you'd stop for the most incredible lunches. Made by a chef, and then at dinner it was literally kind of you got to a certain point where you taught yourself out, and then it was dinner and lots of wine and writers can drink, and people would then put on DVDs and you'd sit down and watch a DVD, and it was real it was quite a kind of an artistic community. And but when it got late into the night, he would then disappear and then do these phone calls. And it's because he was having phone calls with, I suppose, kind of East Coast, doing the TV show, Shameless. But he was also doing State of Play, which was...
Oh, right.
Did you ever see the State of Play, the TV show?
I never saw the original TV series.
Brilliant. It was really good.
Yeah,
but the film was being written at the time, written and kind of made, and he was exec producing that. So
Right.
so it was quite funny because every now and again he would come back and say, "Oh yeah, I was just chatting to Brad Pitt,"
Right.
because Brad Pitt was one of the producers on it.
Right,
and, you know, and then it's like, you know, he'd keep you updated on who's been cast. So it's like, "Oh yeah, we've got Russell Crowe," and you know, and then it was like, you know, we're just making television here. Although
Great TV.
it was good. I mean, you know, the British Shameless is good,
Mm.
but the American Shameless, I remember watching the first couple of episodes, thinking,
Did they ever use any of your
no,
scripts or anything?
no.
That would have been interesting.
That one. The thing is, I kind of came on Shameless later in the series.
Right.
So the first, I think they kind of copied, or they are copying, or are staying faithful to the original storylines. Then they'll probably go off and do their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, they were good because I mean, you know, the first two series of Shameless were very, very good, and like you can't, as long as you're kind of sticking to that blueprint, then you know you can't really go wrong.
Yeah.
Especially with that caliber of cast and. Like John Wells was the guy behind it. He did, you know, he's kind of done West Wing and ER in the past. So, you know, he's a brilliant guy and he knows what he's doing with telly.
Right.
So Shameless. So Shameless.
Yeah. Okay.
And what else did they do? Skins.
Skins.
That's
also a US remake.
Yeah, they did that. I didn't see any of them. But,
No, neither. Apparently, it's filthy.
Yeah, and like, but weird though because it was MTV and. You know, I think it was MTV's first attempt to kind of go adult with a drama, and there was I remember there was real outrage because Middle America and people got nervous. Middle America didn't like it. A lot of Christian groups
didn't believe teenagers had sex.
No, teenagers don't have sex or drink.
Yeah.
And you know, if they take drugs in America, wow,
yeah,
your head explodes. I remember the guy who was the showrunner, who was the guy I worked with, he was over there at the time and he was public enemy #1 and very stressed by it, really, really stressed because you know, he was getting hate mail and one by one all the big advertisers started to withdraw. And so, you know, if you've got nobody to fill the ad spots on your American show with all those breaks, you know.
It probably should have been on Showtime or HBO or something.
I don't know. I think they just loved the idea that it was going to be MTV's first drama, but couldn't find a way of making it work. And I'm sure they tried. But
and they keep on trying. The In-Betweeners, the US In-Betweeners just started this week.
This week, yeah.
Yeah, I think a couple of nights ago, yeah.
I read that it's not that good, but I mean...
Yeah, I don't think they're very good at self-deprecating humour.
No.
As in, I don't think they're going to make those four lads as pathetic as the British one does.
And it's quite hard to sustain that kind of pitifulness, you know? Which, I mean, sorry, I got something in my teeth. We had dinner before.
Yes. So Tex-Mex burps and everything on
I know there is. And anyway, so I've just brought up a bit of my dinner. And in true In-Betweeners kind of humour. But the guys there, it's quite hard to watch In-Betweeners for too long because it's just at one joke. I felt there was no kind of character progression or anything like that, which bugged me, but didn't seem to bug the 5 million people that used to watch it every time. And you know, it's like
many more millions who went to the film.
Oh god, it was the biggest British film for years. I mean, or maybe
Full Monty did people Full Monty?
I mean, I think it made like 30 million or something. And The King's Speech I think made a lot more, but that isn't that's just like a once in a lifetime film that comes along.
There's probably going to be in Betweeners too, I would say.
Really?
I would say.
I suppose if you make that kind of money,
they weren't expecting to make that
let's
money.
Let's face it, those guys, will they?
Yeah,
some of them will work again, but some of them might not. And
they pop up in a few things. Rock and Chips, that show. Some else.
Which was Only Fools and Horses?
Only Fools and Horses prequel.
Right.
Yeah, without the laugh track by the audience.
Right.
Done as almost like a serious drama comedy. Does work. Okay. More recently, you have written What Richard Did. Lenny Abrahamson's new film. I have trouble saying that surname. But jeez, Lenny, if you're listening.
We'll just call him Lenny from now on.
We'll just call him Lenny. Yeah. Lenny is definitely one of Ireland's most talented directors.
Yeah, I would say the best.
I would say the best too, but I don't want to be too. Yeah, but okay, no, he's definitely.
I think I'm allowed to say that coming from, across the water.
From outside looking in, you can say
yeah.
the fact that he made 2 outstanding films back to back is quite a feat in Ireland, I think. So you wrote
his difficult third film.
His difficult third film, yeah. Yeah, good luck.
we should add the caveat that his previous 2 films were written by a very talented, different guy.
Yeah.
And so I've done the third one. But we'll not judge anything yet. It's coming out soon, so I'm sure there'll be plenty of people.
Yeah, it's shown in Toronto.
Yes,
which is exciting.
So what, we're a couple of weeks away from Toronto, and so that's really exciting because it's a major film festival and we're having the world premiere there. And
would you say you have a knack for writing young people? Because you did Skins, there's a lot of young people in Shameless.
Yeah, there are.
This film is, I read one of your drafts and I was like, he's nailed Southside teenagers.
Yeah.
Sorry, that sounded terrible.
Don't tell them
on paper.
I definitely nailed them on paper. Yeah. I hope so. Well, we did a lot of a couple of things. I did a lot of weird, creepy older guy hanging out in Starbucks, listening to kind of young people. Like we're talking young people. We're talking like 17, 18-year-olds. Yeah. And then. So that I wrote a few versions of the script, and then Lenny felt that for true authenticity, we should really get a bunch of actors together and cast them in the roles, but also stay kind of fluid and let the roles kind of grow with the actors as well. So what was happening was, we might get a guy in and there wasn't a part for him, but he was just so dominant,
very organic type thing.
So we were just like, okay,
around him.
I have to write a role for this guy.
Right.
And the guy that plays Richard is, Richard as written was very written. Still hopefully kind of a complex character, but what we got in casting the guy who's called Jack Rayner is, full-bodied kind of 3D kind of Southside boy who's from that world, who was completely unself-conscious, and he was able to give himself. And he knew what was happening. He knew that, whenever he was telling a story, I was there. If it was a good one, I was there scribbling it down. I was kind of I was nicking stuff. I was being a real magpie about, and occasionally, I was completely exploiting him. I'd take him out for a pint, because is he young lad who'd been 19 or so at the time, quite happy to have a pint bought for him, and then he would just kind of like, you just watch him, and I've seen him in several situations where just quietly having a drink, chatting to girls, being the big presence in the room, being the quiet one in the room, and and I really got to know him. And once we kind of wrote him into the part as well, and he was it wasn't people will see and hopefully recognise it's an amazing performance, and he is acting. It's not him.
Right. He isn't Richard, but
no, he's not.
He's from that world, so
he's from that world, and he was able to bring a lot. So I think there's a lot of truth.
Is it a technique you'd like to keep up with future?
I love hanging out with kids. It's great, honestly. Just bring
not just kids, but is it that organic kind of writing around actors?
It's funny because I know like Lenny's doing another film soon, and I think he'd love to be able to get a bunch of actors in a room and
do it that way again.
But the problem is he's kind of working with bigger actors, bigger names, bigger budgets on his next film. Can't say who, but he, it's to do with their availability and can they commit? Can they come across the pond?
Right.
To Ireland for 3 or 4 weeks. That's with these kids we had them for probably about 6 months off and on.
They were just happy to be there.
They were just happy to turn up, have a pint bought for them, and so and we spent hours and hours and days with them. Yeah, and he won't be able to get that.
Nice change from TV, I'd say, where you would come in, you very rigidly have to stick to a character that's been laid out beforehand.
Or even like if you do your own stuff, like you can, you might get it's amazing actually the difference, because you'll turn up, and I remember doing one of my own things where there was rehearsal beforehand. What generally happens is you write the script. There'll be a read through of your script, maybe like 2 to 3 weeks prior to production, and in that time, if there are problems or if people can't say the stuff that you're wanting them to say, there's a lot of rewriting.
Right.
Rewriting up to the day. I remember writing an episode of Shameless when there was, I was writing into the second week of production, and so what they were doing was they had to reschedule all the scenes that were working and they knew they could do. They'd film first, and all the stuff that was problematic and I still had to write was getting done later on in the day. And but then like the actors, as happens with television, they're getting the scenes, maybe like minutes before they're due to go and do it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of testament to good directors and good actors where they can just go, okay, I know what they want here. And there was one episode in particular, or one scene in particular, which felt very improvised around what I was trying to get across.
Nice.
Probably because they got it like 5 minutes before, and it was like the Frank character was driving the scene, and the guy who plays Frank in the UK version is an amazing actor. And so he just went. He must have, I imagine, looked at it and gone, "All right, yeah, that's not working, but I can make it work."
Right.
And because to shut down production and those kind of things, just that's like 25 grand a day or something like that. So.
Okay. Just a reminder, you are listening to a horror podcast.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
Edit all that.
Just no. Have you ever been tempted to get into that genre?
Well, see, here's the thing.
Go on.
All the way through when doing what Richard did, I was contending that it was a horror film, because
I thought that when I read one of the, I thought this is very dark.
And there was we had one discussion about it. I remember, and people. It depends. Obviously, we'll get onto this, but what you define as horror?
Yeah, because we're going to have to get onto this because you have some interesting choices of what you can call a horror.
Yeah. And I, if what I think horror is kind of bad stuff happening to your characters, or you having to feel the bad stuff that they're experiencing, then certainly in what Richard did, it's not an easy watch, and there are a couple of moments where it's very challenging, and what the main character, obviously it's called What Richard Did. He does something which kind of changes and shapes the film, and that central incident is difficult, both as I think as an audience member, and if you're watching that kid have to negotiate that, and I found it horrific. So that's the way I always thought this is my worst nightmare. Yeah. So that's how I would.
Well, it's kind of like how one of your choices, The Deer Hunter, which we will get into later. Obviously, a lot of people wouldn't consider a horror film, but I watched it the other night and I rewatched it. I'd seen it before, but I just want to remind myself because I was a bit like, all right, we'll see how okay. And after I kind of had the same feeling I get after watching a really good horror film, kind of exhausted.
Yeah.
And I imagine what Richard did will probably give you the same. That's intense. Yeah. Intensity. And a horrific, intense experience.
It's a strange one because I've been thinking about it quite a lot recently. You'll probably never be able to tell from the way I'm talking about it, but just in the way that why did we choose to put an audience through this? And I'm sure horror filmmakers think that all the time.
Yeah. Well, Wes Craven constantly says it's good for the psyche. It's cathartic. Yeah. It's a release. To see some nasty stuff go down, and then you're like, everything's a bit messed up, but my life isn't that bad.
Yeah, I suppose that's the thing about art. You can kind of, I suppose it tries to make sense out of the chaos of life and all that. I suppose horror does that because there are, generally there are rules to it.
Okay, so you were considering what Richard did a horror when you were writing it. How do you feel now that you've seen the final cut?
Well, see, this is the thing. I've not seen I've not seen the finished version. So I'll be going to now. So I saw a version which was just before the locked version. So you know, for people who aren't familiar with the editing process, as I wasn't, you know, they're kind of the editor and the director usually sit in a room for a long time, and they'll produce different cuts, and occasionally they'll invite people to come in and talk, you know, experience it with them and just say, okay, that might not be working, and then there might be the odd screening or test screening, but there's not been a test screening. There were just kind of a bunch of people in the room, and we just talked about what we'd seen, and I saw a version which was about 3 or 4 weeks prior to the finished version.
Right. It's not going to change that much.
I don't think. I mean, I think they were hoping to lose like 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
And then I made the decision then, because it was an exhausting experience coming out of it, because you know, it's quite a difficult watch, entertaining but difficult.
Right.
Cathartic.
Yeah. Go see it.
Definitely see it.
Difficult, but go see it.
Yeah, but I remember saying to myself, like, don't watch that again until you've got an opportunity to watch it in the cinema or something.
Right.
And you know, it's been a little while, but because Toronto's coming up, I was like, as soon as we heard about Toronto, I was like, okay, I'm booking the tickets. I'm going. I'm gonna go and watch it.
That's good. So you're not one of those writers who has to step out into the lobby and wait till, you know, because they've seen the film over and over. You're not.
No, I think. Well, definitely watch it.
You want it?
You know, there's going to be opportunities to see it, because it'll be, you know, once it's out in Toronto, then it's coming to Ireland. There's going to be there'll be the Irish premiere, then it'll be released the week after, I think.
Right.
And then it's going to be.
Is there a release date? Do you know?
The 5th of October.
5th of October.
Yeah. So soon.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
6 weeks.
Close to Halloween. Close enough. Yeah.
Well, I think it was, you know, they thought about kind of releasing it towards then, and then I think obviously somebody might have pointed out that it's kind of like it's Halloween, and I guess there's a whole bunch of movies that get released around that time that might confuse. You know.
Paranormal Activity 4 will probably suck up the whole thing.
Oh, do you know what else is out? Skyfall, the Bond film.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah.
So I wouldn't go anywhere near that. You know, like obviously you'd want to go and see that film if that's the event of the week. And maybe a film like what Richard did, which is a bit smaller.
How do you think it will play to people of the age group who are featured in the film? The 16 to 21 year olds. Is that a demographic? I'm not sure. I just made that up.
It might be, but you know, it's a tough one, because you know, it's whether it's so truthful people don't want to see, you know, what's staring them in the face. However, I don't think it is. I think it's kind of you know, I mean, I think we could have gone much further in depicting a more truthful kind of South Side, or even kind of youthful Dublin. Right. And it's not. It's more. I think we stayed truthful to the characters.
Okay.
And they weren't the kind of characters who were going to be kind of. I mean, one of them obviously does a terrible thing, but I'm just nervous and curious.
Well, I think it'll get a lot of people interested, because there's very few films made about Irish teenagers, let alone that particular brand of Irish teenager. Yeah. If there is, they're very much comedies. Of the few that I've seen, Last of the High Kings, which has very few Irish people even in it, you know, or horror comedies like Boy Eats Girl. There's not to actually have something that just shows a serious story involving these people. I would hope that a lot of people would relate to it, because it's something very new to them. Yeah. Anyway, back to horror.
Back to real horror. Yeah.
Can you remember what the first horror film you ever saw was?
Yes, it was. So there's two.
Right.
And I was thinking about this, and I think it was The Omen.
The Omen. That's a good start.
Around about kind of the time it was. I think it was the first time it was shown on TV, and I saw it, and I didn't make it all the way through it, and.
Why was that?
I was just terrified.
Right.
How old would I have been? Not, you know, maybe. It might have been on. I remember. I'm sure it was like ITV in the UK. Showed it all Omen 1 and Omen 2 back to back or something. Right. And I remember it, like people at school coming and going, "Oh my god, did you see?" You know, that was the thing that. And I remember key moments in the Omen, kind of without spoiler alert, kind of you know, like a man getting decapitated. I remember that
the glass pane.
That stays with me to this day. And just the Damien stuff, terrifying. The music, is it Carmina Burana? yeah, I mean that stayed with me. But I think the first proper horror, if you can call it a proper horror, was American Werewolf in London.
Oh, right.
Which again I didn't get all the way through.
No,
just because it's a weird one. Because
that's a slow moving film. Did you actually get to see much werewolf stuff?
I don't think. Well, no, I must have got to the werewolf. I did get to the werewolf.
The transformation.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think because it's a comedy, you know.
It is a comedy, but I think at that age I watched it when I was fairly young too, and I never got the comedy part. I thought that was just a terrifying werewolf film. Yeah.
Because you know the bit I saw, I think I have seen it since, but the bit I saw was the American tourist walking into the pub in what was it, the Peak District or the Lake District or something?
Yeah, the slaughtered lamb, wasn't it? Yeah. Rick Mayall is one of the guys playing chess in that scene.
Really?
Yeah, he's got a tiny little. It wasn't a cameo. He's just an extra. There you go. Watch it.
Yeah. But I just remember that felt like a pub I knew.
Right.
And so that didn't feel like comedy to me.
Yeah.
And just because where I was kind of brought up in England, and then there was like the transformation freaked me out, and I remember going upstairs. And I watched it with my sister and my best mate, and I think we all got into bed together because we were so terrified, and we would have been about 9 or something, and like just going. I think we talked about it for about 2 hours, thinking we'd done this terrible thing. I don't know where my mum and dad were, where the babysitters were.
Right.
But yeah, it was just.
Did it hit a nerve because it was a proper Hollywood monster in the UK? It was like seeing it run around.
I don't even think I even got to the.
That scene, right?
I mean, I've seen it since. I think I have seen it since. I must have seen it since.
It's worth a revisit. Yeah, it's a great film. Okay, so you've picked. I always forget about this. Your beverage is
it's Leffe Blonde, which
Leffe
is
Blonde.
kind of that's my drink. I'm quite sad. I'm a bit of a beer snob, but I'm not that much of a beer snob in the sense I always seem to drink the same beer.
Yeah, I was like, no, pick a beverage, and I know anytime you go into like a craft beer bar or something, you'll try everything. I was a bit disappointed that you picked your favorite beer that you drink all the time.
I just thought
it's a good beer.
So, trademark.
What can you do?
I know. I was thinking because I'm sure there are some like ales out there with kind of horror.
Yeah, but there's the I think it's the British one, Witchward Brewery, and they do a Scarecrow ale. Do they do Hobgoblin? Have you ever tried that?
Is it Hobgoblin?
Is it called Hobgoblin? I don't know. Anyway, they have kind of very horror, dark themed things. So
I know. Do you know what? I was gonna look it up, but it took me so long to actually think of the 3 films that I wanted to talk about.
Right.
So I was like, on the list of things to do, I was like, I'll just stick to Leffe. You know what you're doing with that. And
okay, we'll get the most difficult film out of the way first.
Yes.
Oh, your 3 films: The Deer Hunter,
yes,
Blue Velvet,
and
Don't Look Now.
Don't Look Now, yeah.
Right.
Which is a more, obviously, conventional and
so we're going
respectable horror film.
Yeah. The Deer Hunter, I threw this out on Twitter the other night. My next podcast guest considers that makes it sound silly. Considers The Deer Hunter a horror film, and some people are going, I can see it, it's horrific, but I know generally people don't see it as a horror film. What's your angle? This is a horror podcast. Come on.
See, okay, right. Well, I think one of the hallmarks of horror is it confronts us with horrible things. And this is a film that confronts us with terrible, terrible things, and specifically the horror of war.
Yeah.
So I think for that reason only, it can find its way into a subgenre of horror somewhere. Okay. Clearly there are lots of different genres being explored in The Deer Hunter. It's a coming of age film, for 20-somethings, I guess. It's a buddy movie. There's romantic elements in it, homoerotic elements in it, but I think for a depiction of war, it's when I'm doing, coincidentally, I'm doing 2 war pieces at the moment, from different periods, kind of, Middle Ages in England and the First World War, and because I've been thinking about it quite a lot, when when you asked me to do this, and I was thinking, okay, if I was going to do one about the horrors of war, what's the one that really stays with me? And also there's a story to it, because I remember my dad in the very early days of VHS. Deer Hunter was one of those films that you could get. Like, there was just a bunch of films that you could get,
right?
And I remember Deer Hunter was one of them. And coming downstairs maybe being sent to bed early one night because it was probably classified 18, or even whether it was
just to make you more interested in the film.
Well, exactly. So I was kind of sat. Actually, what I did was I sat on the stairs listening for about a good 10 minutes. And if you watch Deer Hunter, the first hour of it is a beautifully made drama.
Yeah, it's 4 guys hanging out, and they're just getting married, and they're singing "You're just too good to be true." And
it's lovely character development, but
nice,
you don't get anywhere near the dark stuff until a good halfway through the film.
It really establishes those bonds. I don't think I've seen a film take that long, not in a bad way, but to really establish the brotherly bond between, particularly De Niro and Christopher Walken's character. Yeah,
I mean, it's stunning. Like, you would never nowadays. I don't think anyone would have the guts to do that. No. You would never have the guts to. I mean, plenty of people make bum-numbingly long films. But this isn't one of them, and it's kind of it probably is near 3 hours. And
I think a more recent version would open up with some more.
Yeah.
Instead of what they do, which is is it an hour in until they actually
easily
almost smash cuts into
and
Vietnam.
That's the genius of it. I think you're so kind of immersed in the story, and you're so with these characters, and you know them, and you know the kind of the nuances of their relationship, and then bang, you're thrown into a real life or death situation. And life doesn't get any scarier than having to play Russian roulette.
It's weird. I like they have the there's kind of like a foreboding feel about the Green Beret character to me, and apart from that, that's kind of like the only, what would you call it, warning of what's to come. They don't even seem too bothered about what they're going to be facing. And there's no build up to it. There's no them getting on a plane, them being shouted at by some drill sergeant. There's none of that. No. Just cuts to I think a mother holding a child being shot.
Yeah,
it's fairly nasty. Yeah, it really throws you into it.
Yeah, and and then you're thrown into kind of an underwater cage, and fished out of it, and then a gun put in your hand, and I can't remember whether they were always playing against the Vietnamese or whether they were.
Sometimes they're against each other. I think was it a mix. Because it goes back to that scenario later where they're playing against Vietnamese. Either way, I think it wouldn't surprise me if there was a horror film made just based around that idea of being caught and mentally tortured into that. It's verging on, I don't like the phrase, but torture porn.
That it is. It's as close as you can get without it being. It didn't feel exploitative though. It was kind of because you'd invested so much in the characters. You kind of. You really cared what was going to happen to them. I mean, you could kind of, in that kind of classic horror way, kind of guess which ones were going to go, if any of them were going to go, kind of thing. But still, it was tense. And I remember, so it's kind of going back. I remember sitting on the stairs, and my dad could probably hear the kind of my heartbeat or something. And anyway, he's like, "Come on," and I put my head around, and he went, "Not for you," and. Whether I was about 10 or so at the time. It's funny. I've got a little boy who's asleep downstairs.
Right.
And we're going through a phase of not for boys. That's a way of teaching a child. But I'm glad he said to me, "Not for you," because that was, I think it would have been.
That's a lot to take in for a child.
Just to comprehend why would you do that? Why would men do that to each other as well? And it's too much for a child to take in. And however. Because in typical, if you're a father and you say to your child, "Don't do something," inevitably they're going to hit an age where they're going to go, the first film they're going to rent. When they've got their dad's card and, they've got a bit of bum fluff. Please can I have a 15? It was probably an 18, but I probably knew the video girl
so you got it
quite well. So, I mean, I remember, Mum and Dad used to go out every Saturday night. I went through a stage of just kind of renting films that I just knew I wasn't allowed to watch when I was younger, and The Deer Hunter was one of them. And just being, pardoning the pun, blown away by it,
right.
and terrified and not being able to sleep all night.
I think it kind of works really well because it doesn't really explain the situation. It presumes the viewer knows what Vietnam is and why this is happening or why it's not happening or wherever. The complexities.
It doesn't
of
go
it.
into the politics of it.
No, exactly. That's and it makes that scene, because we're not slowly brought up to it, that scene, the Russian roulette scene, almost more nightmarish, more pointless and senseless, and it really makes you go, oh, it really makes you. Imagine if you're just thrown into this scenario. Horrible. That is how it works as a horror film, I suppose.
Yeah, that's the thing. I suppose there is a horror film within a film, within that film. But once you're on that horror road, it just doesn't get off it either. There are things that happen to those characters that,
particularly the Walken character.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, but who has become a staple of horror films as well.
Chris
Walken, so. Yeah, maybe that's me trying to crowbar my way in. But
can you do a Christopher Walken impression?
No, but I went through a phase of pulling my hair. Christopher Walken pulls his hair.
Right.
Do you know
what? He pulls his... just pulls it out sideways?
Yeah, it does. It's to kind of... to activate
look mental.
Follicles or something. To look mental.
Oh, yeah. It activates the follicles.
Very good.
Was that good?
Yeah, I'd love to.
I'll have to listen to that again if it's okay.
No, it sounded alright. But no, like he pulls his hair, or maybe he tips his head and then pulls his hair, and it does that for like 10 minutes a day. But then look at the man. The man's got great hair.
Yeah, he does.
And he's worked at it. So But anyway, I went through a phase of that. But then it was just like large chunks were coming out, so I was like, no, stop doing that. So
do you want to leave it in? Do you think you've made your point? We could go on but it'll probably lead into spoiler territory about how. Okay, so I think everyone knows the Deer Hunter has a Russian roulette scene, so I don't think we have actually spoiled anything.
No.
Yeah. Okay, next one we'll go on to Blue Velvet.
Yes.
Also, now I completely agree with you here. I think David Lynch is a horror director. But some people might go, again, is it a horror film? But then I watched The Omen recently, just to remind myself, and it's really interesting. It has the suburban, kind of remind me of like John Waters, like
it's very John Waters,
isn't it? It's the real. The suburban, American suburbia type thing.
It's the dream, the American dream. It's every day.
What's underneath.
Yeah, and then it goes into subterranean land, and then it gets darker and darker, and you're into this kind of vortex of despair, and it just takes you to places you don't want to go. And I think that's another hallmark of horror.
Yeah, all summed up in that great shot where the camera's going into the grass, and then you just see the maggots and the beetles and the worms and everything, and they're making this horrible noise.
But it goes into the ear, doesn't it? Kind of like so it's kind of which I think is, I don't know. I mean, I remember. Well, anyway, here's another, because I went on to study film, and I remember Blue Velvet. Anyone at university would say, "What's your favourite film?" And I would always say Blue Velvet, just because I came from, not that I came from a particularly sheltered background, but bad stuff didn't used to happen in my town. It's just I'm sure it does now, but it just didn't then.
Right.
It felt very safe, and so that kind of mirrored what was happening in Blue Velvet.
Right.
But you just I always remember watching that for the first time and feeling that I could be Jeffrey Beaumont, the main character, and then as his life became a kind of a twisted nightmare, going, am I still Jeffrey? Am I thinking like him? But I was already so kind of into his head, and because there's a lot of that film is about watching and voyeurism, and it's a great way. I mean, Hitchcock has done it several times, kind of thing, but Lynch kind of borrows techniques in the way he uses the lighting and all the rest of it. But it's a great way of getting into a character's head and investing in a character, and I was completely, I was him, and I was feeling for him all the way through. And so when he was doing terrible things himself, it made you go, oh, can I watch dare I? And then you're kind of like looking away, and I remember feeling at the time like he was watching a horror film.
Well, yeah,
So-
and I think Dennis Hopper's character Frank.
Yeah, Frank.
He's a horror villain.
He's a monster.
He's,
yeah.
yeah. He's
So
despicable human being. He's really revolting.
yeah, and it's a beautifully written piece as well. But they kind of they bring him in at a point where you feel. It's a surprising moment. It's kind of the reveal of the monster. I guess is always. I'm sure horror filmmakers are tortured by that. When do you bring it in?
Well, yeah. Exactly.
And he seemed to come from nowhere. It comes in during a sex scene, I think.
Yeah.
And he's terrifying. And he's kind of sucking that gas.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I think we're all kind of sucking that gas at some stage because it's like it's a weird, trippy film, and if you're really buying into it, it's kind of it leaves you unnerved and really unsettled.
Like most Lynch films, it's this constant dread and fear of what is going to happen next. Lost Highway and
the Lost Highway kind of takes it to. I mean, Lost Highway I found a really difficult watch, but that is probably his truest horror. Yeah.
The turnabout in that story, from I don't even know where the character changes.
Yeah, it just changes.
It just changes. That feels like a nightmare. That feels like a nonsensical nightmare. Where you're just like, why is this happening? And it's
but
actually
it felt real. It took it still takes some getting used to, but with going on to other stuff he's done, it's like Twin Peaks was it was small town America, Cherry Pie, Cup of Deep Black Joe, and murder and rape and incest and all the stuff. You lift that stone, you do not want to see what's underneath that stone. No. Yes, you do. It's like it's all and he's a genius at doing that kind of stuff.
I think one of the greatest sequences in horror ever is Laura Palmer's mother going up to her bedroom and looking around and not seeing anything, and then remembering that sequence that's later, and then she remembers Bob at the end of the bed and replays it, and that's one of the most terrifying things ever. It's
see that when you're watching the TV series, specifically, it was kind of like I remember, it was one of those. It was like people come into school the next day and talk about it, and still be shaking and like especially when the reveal of what happened, who the murderer is, which they stretched out brilliantly for a long time.
It really went off the actual journey.
Afterwards, it was kind of like went off on one, but
it got back to it at the end of the second season.
But it's terrifying. Bob was a terrifying character, and I think David Lynch is brilliant at creating the monster, and people who stay with you and haunt you. So that's why I think I was able to justify Blue Velvet.
Right. If you ever want to freak out, the guest from my second podcast, Charlene, she has nightmares about Bob. You just have to be you just have to say, I think Bob's over there. You could say the smallest little thing, go, that guy, I think that was Bob. But it looks, and she'll freak out.
Well, it's a weird version of like it's a mix between what you would expect a kind of a paedophile to look like and also like a Hell's Angel who's going to kill you, and so mix it up, and he's got a terrifying look close up. He holds a close up really well. It was it's kind of hair on the back of the neck stuff.
That's Lynch, really gets into it. Any more to say on Blue Velvet, or will we move on?
Velvet. I wrote my best essay at university on Blue Velvet.
Right, you did an essay on it. Okay.
Yeah, so this.
Do you have it there? Where you just start reading it out?
No, I can tell you some of the stuff I remember from.
Okay,
essay.
Go on.
No, not at all. But what I remember writing the essay about, in a weird way, was because it was all about fathers and sons, and there was some kind of like there was a real Freudian theme going through it. Like. This is not horror, but I suppose that there are some kind of tropes. But it's kind of all about the good father and the bad father, and that runs all the way through horror and Lynch films anyway. But anyway, that was the theme of my essay.
Right. Okay.
That's what I remember. So a few days ago, when I thought I should write down my thoughts just to justify this, I remember writing down good father, bad father, Frank, one of the worst fathers as a father figure, and also I have to say. I think there are only, well, there's probably more than 2 or 3 moments when I've actually screamed during watching a film.
Right.
One of which is the classic one in Jaws where the head pops out of the boat.
The head pops out, right.
But the other one was when there's a pursuit towards the end of Blue Velvet and involving Frank, and Frank looks up at the camera.
Right.
Oh, it's terrifying. And I've watched that film with people and they've jumped into my lap before, and it's just, again, that's what you're kind of looking for from a good horror, I think.
Yeah, really gets into the conscience and torments you. Okay, the third film, Don't Look Now, Nicholas Roeg. Definitely a horror. Yeah. We're not going to argue about that.
No,
it's terrifying.
It is terrifying.
Yeah. Why that one in particular?
Again, like, because there's a personal thing about it. Well, two reasons. At film school, I studied Nick Roeg and his films and the way that he kind of manipulated audiences, or rather didn't, and watched Don't Look Now a lot.
Walkabout.
We watched Walkabout. Yeah. We watched. I mean, God, a lot of them. I think. See, Nick Roeg is quite elderly now, and I think he will probably go quite soon. And there's going to be a retrospective and a half when his.
Be careful. We were talking about Tony Scott on our last podcast.
Oh, of course,
and he sadly died last weekend. So.
He did. I know. We should remember Tony Scott.
Yeah. We were discussing The Hunger. Last one.
A great film.
Yeah. Were you a fan, Tony Scott?
I was actually.
You were mentioning you were at the premiere of Crimson Tide.
I was at
many years ago.
I was at the premiere of. I was at the French premiere. There's an amazing film festival called the Deauville Film Festival. It's in a very posh part of France, and it's the American Film Festival there, and they just get Hollywood stars, big Hollywood films from the summer, and actually a really good art house crowd come over. They wine and dine them, and it lasts about a week, and I found myself there with a camcorder and press accreditation, and it was one of the best few days of my life. Literally, I was in a room with De Niro, Denzel Washington, with Crimson Tide, Tony Scott. So that was the Tony Scott link. But Kevin Spacey was there with Usual Suspects and Seven.
Yeah, would have been 96.
Yeah, it was around about 95.
Yeah, I think that was the release date for. Yeah, so Spacey.
And just like a whole bunch of Clint Eastwood was there. It was just like, it was amazing. Like, being like a 21-year-old guy or whatever it was at the time. Brilliant. But so Tony Scott was there, and I'd like to say I interviewed him, but I was with a bunch of people who had kind of tape recorders and cameras and stuff, and it was brilliant. And I think Crimson Tide, in a big cinema with amazing sound. I'm a big fan of submarine films.
Really? That's
I think, do you know, if we're going to examine...
Sub-genre?
No,
is that what you call it?
Right. I would toast you there. As a sub-genre, I think, that's tapping into real fears. Being locked in a submarine, and I think maybe that's why I'm fascinated by them. But no, I thought Crimson Tide was great. It was great. It was like a really proper Hollywood film of the time. Yeah. And but then he made Enemy of the State.
I think so.
Which was the one where they kind of really using kind of surveillance technology. And Gene Hackman was in it, and Will Smith. Yeah.
I'll cut this out if it's not Enemy of the State.
I thought it was a great film. But then he kind of went off. I think a couple of films I saw. Domino was unwatchable. And apparently Unstoppable, his last film, was really, really good. I've seen it.
I watched that. It was enjoyable. It was a fun film. I'm not going to sit down and watch it again, but did what it was. Unstoppable train. Yeah. Spoiler, it's stoppable. No, I'm kidding. Alright, yes, so R.I.P. Tony Scott.
Yeah, and so hopefully not R.I.P. Nick Roeg. But
back to, we keep on going off. Back to Don't Look Now. That was my fault. Sorry. Just wanted to get a little acknowledgement to Tony Scott, considering we were talking about him. Don't Look Now. Opens with a horrific scene really, Donald Sutherland really going for it there in that scene with his daughter drowning.
I think we can talk about that because
without
giving too much away, and I think also being a relatively new father. I mean, it impacted on me then watching it as a 20-year-old, but watching it now, it's just the worst thing. It's the worst thing you can imagine. The accidental death of your child, and especially, here's a character who has some sense of seeing, and
well, he kind of picks up that something's happened to his daughter. He's looking at the picture of the figure in the red coat in the church, and I think he spills something on it. Yeah. Does he spill?
Yeah, he spills, and it starts
bleeding through it, and he's looking at that, and meanwhile his son is running towards him, and he seems to know already what's happened. Yeah, and it keeps on cutting back to the bleeding photo, and the colours are spreading it. It's got this sound on the soundtrack. It's really
amazing. I mean, the way
really
he edits is stunning, and but it's a terrifying and really brave start to a film, and where'd you go from there? It becomes a film about grieving. Again, so that in terms of horror, it's making you confront your worst fears, and I just think, it felt so real and yet tender, and it kind of one of the ways they come out of their grieving period is by having that amazing sex scene,
which is brought on from the blind lady who tells Julie Christie that her daughter is happy, and it's giving her this relief.
It unblocks them both. He's needed something from the wife, and she's needed unblocking herself, and it's really, as apart from it being probably the best sex scene ever filmed, it's
as in there was rumours that it was real for a while.
I don't know. Well, they were.
They
together,
say it was.
They were together. I don't know. I mean, God, if there's that many people on a film set, could you?
Yeah. No. I couldn't. Yeah. No, but Donald Sutherland is really.
Maybe he could. Yeah.
Maybe he could. Yeah.
So it was Julie Christie as well. However, as the point, I guess the point of that was it was a cathartic moment, not only for them but for us as well, because we needed a bit of relief. Because from then it then plunges back into this kind of labyrinthine. It's kind of again of like a vortex of despair, and you kind of those all the I suppose there is a labyrinth. I mean, kind of
the city Venice where they most of the film happens. They move to for an extended holiday while he's doing photography work on that type of stuff. It's a really strange setting. Yeah. There's very few cars. Yeah. It's all water and red. Yeah. And his daughter in a red Mac has just drowned. Yeah. And as you're looking, you go, and that's one of those things. If someone says look out for the colour red in that film, you're like, it almost looks like a monochrome film. Yeah. With just red left in. It's like Schindler's List almost. It really sticks out. Just splashes of it. Yeah, that was a little bit pretentious. It was. Yeah.
But then see how many times it's been repeated. It's just one of those iconic.
It is iconic. Yeah.
No, I mean it's the way he can repeats kind of motifs of water and blood and the red coat and stuff like that. I mean, when Donald Sutherland's character arrives, it's not without spoiling a great deal. There is what we think is probably a serial killer on the loose. In Venice as well, which we pay no attention to, but
it's like a little subplot.
There's a sense of foreboding, but there is a sense of foreboding in that film anyway. But interestingly, with him, it's what he chooses to see and what he chooses not to see. Yeah, and yet he is a man who possesses the gift of sight and foresight.
That scene where he sees Julie Christie on the little funeral procession. Yeah. That's chilling, and then she's actually in England at the time. And it's real.
Oh, I mean, it's kind of funnily talking about it. Kind of does. It makes me
gives you chills. Yeah. Really? Okay. Right. Technically, it's incredible too.
Yeah, I think it's Would you maybe say it's one of the best made horror films?
Possibly. There's some.
I mean, I'm sure people would probably argue for The Shining because it's so technically
I'd argue
precise.
for The Exorcist.
Oh yeah.
Which I think is just technically brilliant.
brilliant.
But there's some very adventurous moves, camera moves, and everything. There's a while Julie Christie is in the bathroom with the two ladies. There's this camera move with it cuts into a slide that Donald is looking at, and the camera and it fills up the whole screen, and the camera moves around at this almost 90-degree angle, maybe more, out from there, and you're looking and going, the size of the cameras back then, that was an impressive move, and it does it really fast. It's not sped up. It's full of loads of little things like that to really go, wow, this is impressive. Yeah.
It must. I think. I hope I'm right in saying that he was the cinematographer on Lawrence of Arabia.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is one of the best shot films I think ever.
Yeah.
He may have been one of them because the
really knows how to fill up the whole screen.
Yeah.
Like
he knows his way around the camera, and that's evident, you know. But then also, like, I don't know whether he sat in the edit suite, but it felt like whoever he was editing with was a genius as well, because the way that they displaced us and kind of drew us into a scene and took us out of the scene and just kind of
and the sound design of that film as well. It's
expertly done. It really is.
It's all there to make you feel constantly uneasy, and like something really terrible happens. It's going to happen.
Yeah, because we were talking before about kind of whether it's like a British film or, you know, it has
I just wasn't sure about because I know it opens up in England's English countryside, but I wasn't.
I suppose you get into murky waters, like who funds a film, you know,
exactly,
and all that kind of stuff. But
it feels British.
I consider it British, and I think it's probably in the top 3 films, best British films. Yeah.
Well, can you throw out the other 2?
I would say Lawrence of Arabia, if that is one of them.
That's British.
And
it's very British.
I know everyone says The Third Man, and The Third Man is very good. I don't know.
Okay.
Let me think. I might just we'll be halfway through the next conversation, and I'll go.
All right.
Full Monty.
No. Right.
I've always got a soft spot for Kes, but that's just
That's a great film. Yeah. Okay, no, we'll leave it at that.
Yeah,
that's a good top 3. I think so. Yeah. Okay. Any more to say about Don't Look Now? This is one of those films.
Is it the most imitated? You know, are there certain images in that film which are the most imitated in horror films, or just in scary films?
I don't know. Well, the whole theme of it, I never realised. Antichrist, obviously, there's massive similarities there. That more recent horror film,
definitely.
Opens up with the death of a child. Sex is in Don't Look Now is kind of like I don't like to say a cure.
Yeah.
In that film, but sex is kind of like makes things worse in Antichrist. It's almost the opposite sides of I don't know,
the guilt that comes with sex.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is interesting. Are you a fan of Antichrist? Have you seen it?
I've only seen like the first 10 minutes because everyone said watch the first 10 minutes of it.
Right.
It's funny because I was a real like Lars von Trier fan. And not that I was influenced at all by what he said a couple of years ago at Cannes and all the rest of it, but I think he has on occasion disappeared up his own arse and should know when to shut up. He's a really, really, really smart guy. And I don't know whether he's just being a provocateur or whatever, but he, you know, and his films are definitely provocative, so you probably, you know, he's in full control of everything he does.
Exactly, yeah.
But he, you know, he's at times I just think, stop playing with me.
Right.
Just do it.
I think that's right, and he realizes that about himself. And I think he's stopped doing that type of. He's stopped with publicity. He doesn't really talk to journalists anymore.
I wouldn't after that.
No, you wouldn't after what he said. No, he's right too. Yeah. Okay. Are we done with Don't Look Now? Anything else?
I think so.
It's one of those things.
Grill me on it. Go on.
No, don't agree. It's one of those things, and when you start reading what people have to say about it, it's dense.
It is. I bet it's one of the most written about films from like film students.
I'd say exactly. The contextual stuff and like the subtext, everything. Yeah. It's really. Yeah.
It's a proper film.
It is a proper film. I gave you a choice of 3. If I was to say, throw in one more, what would you pick? One more horror film?
Ooh. Well, I had Jaws.
Jaws
in my shortlist. Just because I just think it's genius.
Okay.
And I think people will be watching Jaws in 100 years' time.
Yes, they will. Yes.
But also, it's terrifying, and in that way, it's very rare to do now because can you imagine going into the water in 1977, 78 after seeing that film?
Oh yeah, was it 75? I think it was. But yeah, either way, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I could be wrong, but yeah, it's and it's still effective.
Yeah,
still.
I mean, every time I go into the water now, just off island, there could be a shark.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's so scorched into my brain.
Yeah. And the way the water is heating up, there probably is a shark. Yeah. No, they're going all over the place.
Trust
now.
me,
Yeah.
it's not that warm. There are some weird jellyfish, however, off the Irish coast at the minute.
There you go.
Yeah.
That hasn't been a jellyfish.
No, there's not been a jellyfish.
Right. Yeah, Jaws definitely really up there.
Has anyone talked about Jaws yet?
No, I am. If I ever do myself, if I do myself, that's terrible. If I ever put in my own top
you can't go a guest, then you just have
I'll just go. Hello, everybody. Jaws, I love it. Yeah, no, it's a perfect horror film. Okay, we'll leave it there. Thanks for listening, everybody. Everyone go see what Richard did. What date is it?
In Ireland, October the 5th, and then hopefully beyond in the UK and maybe in the States.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Malc. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.